From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this first weekend of spring, even though it may not look like it outside to some of you. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. A new mystery illness hitting dairy herds in the South.
It appears that it's mostly animals that are in mid to late lactation.
An eroding ag economy, but there's one major bright spot today.
Cow-calf producers are going to be in the driver's seat for the next year and a half, 2 years.
An acreage dilemma is unfolding across the U.S. this year.
Unfortunately, the bank and access to capital and credit may have that part of that decision too.
Michelle Rook hits the fields. Plus, signs of spring and signs of hope after the Texas wildfires' wrath left unimaginable scars for producers there.
U.S. Farm Report, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when the testing grounds meet the proving grounds. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Now for the news. A mystery illness right now is hitting dairy production in some southern states. Dairies in the Texas Panhandle seem to be hit the hardest, but there are also cases reported in New Mexico, and the American Association of Bovine Practitioners telling me that veterinarians in Kansas have also reported similar symptoms. The association says it's impacting about 10% of the herd, and it's not causing mortality. Instead, it's hitting older cows and causing a loss of appetite. As a result, milk production declines 10 to 20%. All right, here's what we know right now. The symptoms of the illness last 10 to 14 days, but the exact cause of the illness is not known. On your screen, here are some of the warning signs. Impacted herds have reported older cows and mid-lactation may be more likely to be severely impacted than younger cows and fresh cows or heifers. Texas officials say they are working with USDA to further monitor and evaluate reported cases. I spoke to Dr. Fred Gingrich, a cattle veterinarian who's also the executive director of the AAPB. He told me they're working to find an answer as they understand the primary impact right now is economic losses for dairy producers, since the herds lose about 20% of milk production for 2 weeks.
It appears that the disease peaks in about 3 to 4 days and lasts 10 to 14 days. Older cattle appear to be more clinically affected, more severely affected, lactation 2 in older animals. And although it's not consistent with every herd, it appears that it's mostly animals that are in mid to late lactation. So that's all pretty unusual that we have something going on in older animals and it's not fresh cows.
Now, Gingrich says if a dairy producer notices a rapid onset of cows not eating or a drop in rumen activity in your herd, it's essential to call your vet immediately. The Biden administration has announced new automobile emissions standards, and it's creating some concerns in the ag community. The new rule applies to cars, SUVs, and most pickups for model years 2027 through 2032, and it could push U.S. automakers to manufacture more electric vehicles and hybrids in order to meet the targets. Right now, the average CO2 tailpipe release is about 240 grams per mile. Under the new rule, by 2032, that number would be just 82 grams per mile. But the auto industry could meet the limits if 56% of new vehicle sales are electric by 2032, along with plug-in hybrids or other partially electric cars or more efficient gasoline-powered vehicles. The National Corn Growers Association and other groups coming out against the plan, saying it ignores the benefits of ethanol. There are a lot fewer wheat farms in the U.S. right now. In fact, USDA says the number of wheat farms in the country has declined by more than 40% in the last 20 years. This graphic from the Economic Research Service details the drop. As you can see, in 2022, there were more than 169,000 wheat farms in the country. But look at 2022, with the total number reaching just over 97,000. Along with the drop in wheat farms, there's been a drop in wheat production, which has remained below 40 million acres since 2017. Leaders with the National Association of Wheat Growers are hoping to address some of the profitability issues in the next farm bill.
They're looking at maybe doing 10%. So if we go from 550 to $5.55, is that really enough of an adjustment to offset the cost of production? And I would have to say no, unless we're going to do meaningful changes to PLC where we increase from $5.50 to $6.50 or $6.75 so that the PLC price is more reflective of the cost of production, then yes, we really need to be working towards that. But it comes back down to the lack of funding in the Farm Bill, and making those larger jumps in PLC are much more expensive. And so yes, we support an increase, but it has to be an effective increase.
Gould says they'd also like to see changes to the crop insurance program, including improving coverage and lowering premiums in order to cover the cost of production. We have a new snapshot of what consumers think about meat. The North American Meat Institute has released its 19th annual Power of Meat. The survey shows 80% of Americans describe themselves as meat eaters, and the number of households that purchased meat last year held steady at 98%. Another key finding, the number of people seeking to decrease the amount of meat they eat has fallen by 20% since 2020. The data from Circana shows that Generation X accounts for the greatest proportion of sales at 32%, while boomers buy meat the most frequently at 53 times a year. But inflation is factoring into purchases. 73% of Americans are making one or more changes to meat buys at the grocery store to save money. Well, just when we started talking about the winter that wasn't in the upper Midwest and the Northern Plains, it seems winter is making a late arrival. We have a check of weather coming up next.